house on Bellamy Street sat between two boarded-up row homes in a forgotten corner of the city. Everyone in the neighborhood called it the Breathing House. No one knew who built it. No one knew why the windows were always open, even in winter. But people swore the house inhaled when the sun went down and exhaled when the streetlights flickered on. Malik first noticed it the summer he moved in with his aunt. The block was loud most nights. Sirens, bass from old cars, people yelling across stoops. But the house at 314 stayed silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that made your ears ring. One night, Malik was walking home from the corner store when he heard something strange. A slow dragging sound from inside the house, like furniture being pulled across the floor. Then came a whisper through the broken screen door. Malik. He froze. The voice was soft but clear. Too clear. The problem was he had never told anyone on the block his name. He told himself someone was playing a trick, maybe kids hiding inside. But the front door slowly creaked open by itself. Inside, the hallway was dark and stretched farther than it should have. Much farther than the outside of the house allowed. The whisper came again. Malik, come inside. It's lonely here. The house smelled like wet wood and something rotten. The walls were covered with old photographs. People from the neighborhood, some smiling, some crying, some missing. Malik leaned closer to one photo and his stomach dropped. It was a picture of him, taken earlier that night at the corner store. Standing behind him in the photo was a tall shadow with arms too long and fingers like wires. The door slammed behind him. He spun around and grabbed the knob. It wouldn't move. From upstairs came footsteps, slow, heavy. One step, then another. Then the breathing started, a deep inhale that made the walls stretch. A long, rattling exhale that made the floorboards sink beneath his shoes. Malik ran for the hallway, but the corridor kept growing longer. The more he ran, the farther the exit moved. The lights flickered and every photograph on the wall began to change. In each picture, the shadow behind him was getting closer. He heard it descending the stairs now, each step cracking the wood, each breath louder. The whisper was no longer soft. You shouldn't have come in. Malik finally reached the end of the hall and burst into the living room. But the room wasn't empty anymore. The walls were covered with hundreds of photos now. Every missing person from the neighborhood. Every kid who vanished. Every man who was never found. And in every single picture, the same tall shadow stood behind them. Malik slowly turned around. The thing filled the hallway. Its head bent sideways to fit beneath the ceiling. Its fingers scraped the walls, leaving black marks like burns. When it spoke, the entire house inhaled with it. The house remembers everyone who enters. The lights went out. The next morning, the people on Bellamy Street noticed something new inside the broken front window. There was another photograph on the wall. A boy holding a plastic bag from the corner store. And behind him, a tall shadow smiling with teeth that stretched far too wide. The photograph of Malik hung crooked on the living room wall, beside dozens of others. The house was quiet again. But the quiet inside the breathing house was never the kind that meant peace. It was the kind that waited. Nights passed on Bellamy Street. People still heard the same things they always had. Sirens cutting through the humid air, distant gunshots, music rumbling from car trunks. But sometimes, when the street went still, something else could be heard coming from number 314. A long inhale, then a slow, tired exhale, like the building itself had lungs. The neighborhood kids dared each other to run up the cracked walkway and touch the front door. Most never made it past the gate. Those who did said the wood of the house felt warm, warm like skin. 1 week after Malik disappeared, his Aunt Keisha sat on her porch, staring at the place. She hadn't slept in days. The police said Malik probably ran away. They always said that when kids from this neighborhood vanished. But Keisha knew Malik. He wouldn't leave without his phone, without his shoes, without saying goodbye. She kept remembering the last thing he said before he walked to the store. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." 5 minutes had turned into 7 days. That night the air was thick, and the streetlight across from the breathing house flickered like it was nervous. Keisha noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faint glow behind the living room window. She stood up slowly. At first she thought it was a television, but the light wasn't moving like a screen. It was pulsing. With every pulse came a sound. Inhale, exhale. Keisha walked across the street. Before she even reached the steps, she heard something faint from inside. A voice. She stopped. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The voice was weak, scratching, like someone talking through dirt. "Auntie." Her breath caught. "Malik." She rushed to the door and pounded on it. "Malik. Baby, are you in there?" The house inhaled. The door slowly opened. An icy draft slid across the porch. Keisha hesitated for only a second. Then she stepped inside. The door shut behind her with a wet thud. The hallway stretched before her, just like a normal hallway would. But the air inside felt wrong. Thick, warm, alive. The smell of mildew and something older filled her lungs. "Malik," her voice echoed in strange directions. The walls were covered with photographs. She stepped closer to one and her stomach twisted. She recognized faces from the block. Terrence, who disappeared in 2018. Little Jamal, who vanished walking home from school. An old man named Mr. Rodriguez, who used to feed stray cats. All of them smiling, frozen in dusty frames. And behind every single one of them was a shadow. Keisha turned slowly and saw it. Malik's picture. He was holding a plastic bag from the store. His eyes were wide with terror, and behind him stood something tall and warped. She backed away. No, the floor creaked upstairs. Footsteps. One step, then another. The breathing got louder. Inhale. The walls bulged slightly like something huge was filling them. Exhale. The hallway shrank again. Keisha ran to the door and grabbed the knob. It wouldn't turn. She slammed her shoulder into it. Nothing. The footsteps above her continued. Heavy. Deliberate. She could hear nails dragging across the wood with every step. "Malik," she screamed. The whisper returned from somewhere deep in the house. "He's still here." Keisha spun around. Where? The whisper slid along the walls. Everywhere. Suddenly, every photograph in the hallway trembled. The glass rattled. Then all the pictures tilted at the same time, pointing toward the staircase. The breathing deepened. Inhale. Exhale. The staircase was darker than the rest of the house. Keisha climbed it slowly. The wood groaned like it was protesting each step. Halfway up, she heard something faint. Scratching from inside the walls. And voices. Hundreds of voices layered together. Whispers, whimpers, cries. Some begging, some praying, some screaming silently behind plaster. She reached the top. The hallway upstairs was impossibly long. Doors lined both sides, but each door had something carved into it. dozens more. Some of the carvings were fresh. She approached the door labeled Malik. The wood was warm. Her hand shook as she turned the knob. The room inside was empty, except for walls covered in photographs. In the center of the room stood Malik. He wasn't moving. He faced the wall, staring at a picture of himself. Malik. He didn't respond. She stepped closer. "Baby, it's me." Slowly, he turned around. His eyes were wrong. They were dark and glossy like wet glass. "Auntie, you shouldn't have come." His voice sounded layered, like something else was speaking underneath him. The house inhaled. The walls of the room expanded outward, like lungs filling. Malik's body jerked suddenly. His arms snapped upward unnaturally. He began walking toward her in stiff puppet-like steps. It doesn't like when people try to leave. Keisha grabbed him and pulled him toward the door. "We're getting out of here." But Malik stopped moving. His feet refused to slide across the floor, like something underneath the boards was holding him in place. Then the breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. The entire house went still. Every photograph in the room turned at once. All the faces now looked at the doorway. Something tall was standing there. It had unfolded itself from the darkness of the hallway. Its head brushed the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, bending in places joints shouldn't exist. Its skins looked like stretched wallpaper covered in faint moving faces. And its mouth was a long rip across its head, filled with crooked teeth made of splinters. When it breathed again, the entire room inhaled with it. Malik whispered without moving his lips, "It found you." The creature tilted its head. The house exhaled, and every photograph on the wall suddenly changed. In each picture now, Keisha was standing inside the frame, behind her. The shadow was reaching forward. Keisha couldn't move. The thing in the doorway folded itself lower, its head bending sideways like wet cardboard, so it could fit beneath the frame. The hallway behind it stretched into a darkness that seemed deeper than the night outside. The house inhaled again, and the walls swelled slightly, as if the entire building were filling with air before speaking. "You are not supposed to take them back," the thing said, its voice like wood splitting in winter. Malik's body twitched beside her. His feet were still rooted to the floor. His eyes flickered between fear and something else. Something tired. "Auntie," he whispered, barely moving his mouth. "Don't fight it." Keisha grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "We're leaving." The creature stepped into a room. The floor groaned under its weight, though its body looked thin as stretched cloth. As it moved, the faces under its skin shifted, dozens of expressions pressing outward like they were trapped beneath glass. Some were screaming, some were crying, some looked blank and hollow. Keisha saw one she recognized. Mr. Rodriguez. His mouth opened silently inside the creature's arm. She staggered back in horror. The house exhaled. Every photo in the room rattled. The creature raised one long finger toward the wall. The photographs began to move. Slowly, like old film rewinding, the images changed. They showed moments from the street outside. Kids playing basketball in the cracked court. A woman carrying groceries. A man fixing his car. Then each picture showed the same moment. The person walking past the breathing house. And behind them, in the reflection of the window, or in the shadow on the sidewalk, the tall shape was already there, watching, waiting. Keisha's chest tightened. "You've been taking people," she said. The creature's head tilted further until its neck made a wet snapping sound. "No," it replied. "They come inside." Malik's fingers trembled. "It's true," he said softly. "Everyone hears it eventually." Keisha looked at him. "Here's what." The house inhaled. The whisper came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, everywhere at once. Soft. Patient. "Your name." Keisha felt a cold wave move through her spine. Malik continued, his voice distant. "At night, when you pass by, it calls you. Just once. If you answer, it opens the door." The creature stepped closer now. The ceiling cracked slightly as its shoulders brushed against it. Dust drifted down like gray snow. "They are lonely," the creature said calmly, pointing one thin arm toward the faces inside its skin. "The house remembers them. The house keeps them." Suddenly, a violent pounding shook the front door downstairs. All three froze. Another pounding, loud, angry. A man's voice shouted from outside. "Keisha, you in there?" It was Darnell from across the street. Keisha's heart jumped. "Darnell," she screamed instinctively. The creature's head snapped toward the stairs. For the first time, its calm expression twisted slightly. The house inhaled sharply. The staircase cracked as something shifted within the walls. Darnell's voice shouted again. "Hold on, I'm coming in." The front door burst open downstairs. Light from the street poured into the hallway below. Footsteps rushed inside, then stopped. Darnell's voice lowered into confusion. "Yo, why this hallway so long?" The creature turned slowly toward Keisha. "You called another." Its mouth widened. Keisha grabbed Malik's arm and pulled. "Run!" This time his feet moved. They sprinted toward the hallway upstairs behind the creature, racing down the endless corridor of carved doors. Behind them, the thing unfolded its limbs and began to follow. It did not run. It simply stepped. Yet each step covered impossible distance. The breathing grew louder again. Inhale. The hallway stretched. Exhale. It shrank. Malik yanked open random doors as they passed. Inside each room were more photographs, more walls breathing slowly, more echoes of trapped voices. Then they heard Darnell screaming downstairs. Not words, just pure terror. The creature paused mid-hallway, its head tilting as if listening. The house inhaled deeply. The scream cut off. The house exhaled slowly. Malik's face went pale. Too late. From the far end of the hallway, a new door appeared, where there hadn't been one before. The wood was fresh and wet-looking. Slowly, letters carved themselves into it. D-R-L-L. The creature resumed walking. The distance between it and them shrank with each breath. Keisha spotted a window at the end of the corridor. Moonlight leaked through the cracked glass. There, they ran. The floor beneath them felt soft now, like damp soil instead of wood. The walls pulsed on both sides, faint handprints pressing outward from inside the plaster. Malik reached the window first and shoved it open. Cold night air rushed in. "Jump!" Keisha climbed out onto the narrow roof ledge. But Malik froze again. She turned. His body had locked stiff once more. The creature was right behind him now, filling the hallway with its tall, crooked shape. "He belongs to the house," it said gently. Keisha grabbed Malik's arm and pulled with all her strength. For a moment he moved. One foot slid toward the window. Then dozens of hands suddenly pushed out from the walls, gray, dusty hands clawing through the plaster. They grabbed Malik's legs, his waist, his shoulders. Malik screamed. He reached toward her desperately until only his fingers remained visible. Then they vanished. The wall sealed itself again. Silence. The creature turned its attention to Keisha, standing on the window ledge outside. The house inhaled. The walls bulged outward as if trying to reach her even beyond the window. "You may leave," it said calmly, "but you will hear it again." Keisha didn't wait. She jumped from the roof to the yard below and hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her ankle. She scrambled up and ran across Bellamy Street without looking back. But behind her, from inside the house, came the slow, familiar sound. Inhale, exhale, and faintly, carried on the night air, came Malik's voice from somewhere deep inside the walls. "Auntie." But when the police arrived the next morning, number 314 Bellamy Street looked empty again. The hallway was short. The rooms were bare. No photographs, no broken walls, no sign anyone had been inside. Except for one thing. On the living room wall hung two brand new pictures. One showed Malik staring at the wall upstairs. The other showed Darnell standing in the doorway, and in both photographs, behind them, the tall shadow was smiling. The house inhaled quietly, waiting for the next voice to answer when it whispered a name in the dark. Keisha didn't sleep for 3 nights after escaping the house. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it again. That slow breathing. Inhale, exhale, and sometimes, in the quiet moments between midnight and morning, she heard something worse. A whisper sliding through the dark of her apartment. "Keisha." The first time it happened, she shot upright in bed and turned on every light in the room. Nothing was there. The windows were closed. The hallway outside her door was empty. But the air in the apartment felt wrong. Warm. Heavy. The same way the breathing house had felt. She told herself it was in her head. Trauma. People from the neighborhood said the same thing when they heard what happened. Some believed her, some didn't. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one went near 314 Bellamy Street anymore. Even during the day, people crossed to the other side of the road when they walked past it. The house sat quietly like it always had. Its windows open, its door closed, and sometimes, late at night, the porch light flickered, even though there had never been electricity connected to the place. A week passed, then another. The police investigation went nowhere. They searched the house twice, brought dogs, brought equipment, tore up floorboards. They found nothing. No secret rooms, no tunnels, no photographs, just dust and cracked wood. But the officers who searched it said something strange afterward. They all complained about the same thing. They swore they heard breathing inside the walls. One officer quit 2 days later. He told his partner the house whispered his name while he was inside. Keisha tried to move on. She tried to convince herself Malik was gone, that nothing inside that house could be changed. But every night the whisper returned. Keisha. Sometimes it sounded like Malik. Sometimes it sounded like something deeper. One night around 2:30 a.m., she heard a different voice layered into the whisper. "Darnell's, help us." She froze in bed. The room felt smaller. The air felt thicker. And then the breathing started again. Inhale. The walls of her apartment creaked. Exhale. The floor beneath her feet shifted slightly. Keisha grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room. Everything looked normal. until she pointed the light toward the hallway. The paint on the wall was moving. At first, she thought it was her eyes playing tricks, but then a handprint pushed outward slowly from beneath the paint, like something trapped underneath the drywall. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "You left us here." More handprints appeared pressing from inside the walls. Faint faces formed in the plaster, blurred shapes trying to push through. Keisha stumbled backward. No. No. The breathing grew louder. The apartment lights flickered. Then suddenly, silence. The walls went still. The handprints faded. The air felt normal again. Keisha stood there shaking for a long time before she realized something else had changed. Her phone screen had turned off, but she hadn't touched it when it lit up again by itself. There was a new photo in her gallery. She hadn't taken it. The image showed the living room of the breathing house, the walls covered in photographs, and in the center of the room stood Malik. He was staring directly at the camera, his mouth slightly open like he was trying to speak. Behind him, the tall creature stood with its head bent sideways, and in the reflection of the glass frame, Keisha was visible too, as if she had been standing inside the house when the picture was taken. Her hands started shaking uncontrollably. Then her phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. No number, no contact, just a picture attached. She opened it. It was the hallway upstairs in the breathing house, the carved doors stretching endlessly into darkness. One of the doors was different. It was freshly carved. The name on it read Keisha. Her blood ran cold. The phone buzzed again. Another photo. This one showed the front door of the house, open, the dark hallway waiting, and at the bottom of the image was a message typed in plain white text. "Come back." The breathing sound returned in her apartment. Inhale, exhale, and this time, the whisper was no longer distant. It was right behind her. "We saved a room for you." Slowly, Keisha turned around, and for a split second, she saw the hallway of the breathing house stretching across the wall of her apartment, like a doorway that didn't belong there. Doors lined both sides, carved names everywhere, and at the far end of the hallway, the tall creature stood watching her. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just waited. Then the walls snapped back to normal. The hallway vanished. The apartment was silent again. But Keisha understood something now. The house didn't just sit on Bellamy Street anymore. It had learned how to breathe somewhere else, and somewhere inside its endless hallways. Malik and the others were still alive, waiting for someone to answer when the house whispered their name again in the dark.
The city never truly slept. Even at 3:17 a.m., when most windows were dark and the traffic had thinned to the occasional taxi slicing through red lights, the city breathed, slow, metallic, and patient. Elias knew this because he drove through it every night. His job was simple: night courier, envelopes, small boxes, things that needed to move quietly across the city while everyone else dreamed. He liked the silence. He liked the empty avenues where the skyscrapers looked less like offices and more like enormous black cliffs. But there was one part of the city he never liked driving through: District 12. No one ever explained why. Dispatch simply marked the deliveries and expected them done. At first, Elias assumed it was just the usual rumors people spread about old neighborhoods. Every big city had them. Stories about abandoned subway tunnels, derelict hospitals, buildings where the lights sometimes turned on by themselves. Still, District 12 had a different feeling. It began gradually. The streetlights became farther apart, the buildings older, taller too, but not modern tall. Older stone towers and concrete blocks from decades ago, their windows stacked like endless rows of watching eyes. That night, his GPS guided him straight into the heart of it. Package drop, 1107 Halberg Tower, the screen read. Elias frowned. Halberg Tower was one of those massive buildings that had been half empty since the financial crash years ago. 28 floors, most abandoned, some rented cheaply to people who didn't ask questions. Rain began to fall as he turned the corner. The building rose ahead of him, its facade wet and dark, the top lost in low clouds. Only a few windows glowed faintly. Elias parked by the curb. The street was empty. No pedestrians. No other cars. Just the low hum of electricity in the wires overhead and the whisper of rain sliding along the pavement. He grabbed the package from the passenger seat. It was strange. Long and narrow, wrapped in dull brown paper with no return address. He had delivered thousands of packages, but this one felt heavier than it should have been. Not physically heavy. Something else, like holding an object that had been somewhere cold for a very long time. The lobby door opened with a reluctant metallic groan when he pushed it. Inside, the air smelled like dust and wet concrete. The lobby lights flickered, as if unsure whether they wanted to remain on. The place looked deserted. The front desk was empty. Old mailboxes lined one wall, many hanging open like crooked teeth. At the far end stood the elevator. Its doors were closed, but the floor indicator above it was moving slowly downward. 18, 17, 16. Elias waited. The building creaked around him. Old pipes clanged somewhere deep in the walls. The elevator indicator kept ascending until it reached the lobby. The doors slid open with a tired hiss. No one was inside. Good, Elias muttered. He stepped in and pressed the button for floor 11. The door shut. The elevator began rising. 2, 3, 4. Then it stopped. The light flickered. Elias looked at the panel. The elevator had stopped at floor 6, but he hadn't pressed 6. The doors opened halfway, then fully. The hallway outside was dark. Not dim, dark. The overhead lights were off, leaving only a thin gray glow from distant windows. Elias leaned slightly forward, peering out. No movement, no sound. The hallway stretched far in both directions, lined with identical apartment doors. For a moment, he thought he saw something move at the far end, but when he blinked, it was gone. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed down the corridor and returned thinner. No response. After a few seconds, the elevator doors closed again. The car continued upward. 7, 8, 9. Elias exhaled slowly. Old building, he told himself. Faulty system. But when the elevator reached the 11th floor and the doors opened again, he froze. The hallway looked exactly the same as the one on the 6th floor. Same long corridor. Same darkness. Same rows of doors disappearing into shadow. Even the faint gray light from distant windows looked identical. Elias stepped out. His shoes echoed softly on the tile floor. The door numbers began at 1101. The delivery address was 1107. He walked slowly past 1103, 1105. Then he stopped. Apartment 1107's door was slightly open, just an inch. The gap was black, no light inside. He knocked gently. The door creaked wider. The apartment beyond was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no sound. Just bare concrete walls and a single window showing the rainy city far below. "Hello?" Elias said again. Nothing. He looked down at the package. Maybe the instructions meant leave it inside. He stepped across the threshold and placed it on the floor. The moment the package touched the ground, he heard something behind him. Footsteps. Slow, soft, approaching from the hallway. Elias turned. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued. Tap, tap, tap. They sounded as if someone were walking toward the apartment, yet there was no one there. The sound reached the doorway and stopped. Elias felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "Okay," he whispered, backing away. Delivery done. He stepped out of the apartment and pulled the door shut. The hallway was silent again. He walked quickly toward the elevator. When he pressed the call button, nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. The elevator indicator above the door was blank. The entire panel had gone dark. Elias frowned and checked his phone. No signal. The hallway lights flickered once, then again. Somewhere down the corridor, a door creaked open. Elias looked toward the sound. One of the apartment doors had slowly swung outward. Beyond it was darkness. Then another door opened farther down. Then another. One by one, doors began to creak open along the hallway, all of them revealing black interiors. Elias stepped backward until his shoulders touched the elevator doors. "Hello," he called again, louder this time. The hallway answered with silence. Then he heard breathing, not his own, something else, faint, wet, coming from inside the open apartments. Elias pressed the elevator button repeatedly. Nothing. The breathing grew louder. Several apartments now had shapes in the darkness. Not clear shapes, just deeper shadows moving inside the black rooms. One of them stepped into the hallway. At first, Elias thought it was just a person standing in the dark. But then the hallway lights flickered again, and he saw that the thing's limbs were too long. Its arms hung nearly to the floor, its head tilted sideways as if its neck had too many joints. Another shape emerged from a different doorway. Then another. They didn't rush him. They just stood there in the corridor, watching. Elias finally did the only thing his instincts allowed. He ran. He sprinted down the hallway away from the elevator, past rows of doors and shadows that seemed to stretch toward him as he passed. The corridor didn't end. It kept going and going. The apartment numbers climbed higher. 1115, 1121, 1134. That didn't make sense. Floor 11 shouldn't have that many units. The lights above him flickered violently as he ran. Behind him, the footsteps multiplied. Dozens now. Long limbs slapping softly against tile. Elias reached a stairwell door and shoved it open. He burst into the stairwell and slammed the door behind him. The echo of pursuit stopped instantly. The stairwell was silent. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Just get out," he whispered. "Just go down." He started descending the stairs 2 at a time. Floor 10, floor 9, floor 8. But something was wrong. The building felt deeper, the air colder. When he reached the door for the lobby level, the sign beside it didn't say lobby. It said floor 0. Elias hesitated. Halberg Tower never had a floor 0. Slowly he pushed the door open. The corridor beyond looked older than the rest of the building. The walls were bare concrete, the ceiling low. Dim yellow bulbs hung on wires every few meters. And along both sides of the corridor were doors. Hundreds of them, each one identical, each one slightly open. From inside the rooms came that same wet breathing sound. Elias stepped back toward the stairwell, but the door behind him had disappeared. In its place was another identical hallway, stretching into darkness. The lights flickered again. The breathing grew louder. And somewhere deep in the endless corridors of the city beneath the city, something began to walk toward him. Slowly, patiently, as if it had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally deliver the package. Elias stood frozen in the corridor of floor 0, staring at the endless rows of doors. The yellow bulbs above him buzzed faintly, each one swinging slightly as if the building itself were breathing. The breathing from inside the rooms grew louder, not synchronized, not human. Hundreds of different rhythms, wet and heavy, filling the air like the lungs of something enormous hidden behind the walls. He forced himself to move, slowly at first, then faster. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, doors lining both sides like cells in some underground hive. Some doors were open wider than others. Inside them he saw almost nothing, just black rooms that seemed deeper than they should be. But occasionally something moved inside, a shape shifting in the dark, an arm sliding along the floor, a head turning slowly toward the doorway. Elias kept walking. The sound of his footsteps echoed strangely, not just ahead and behind him, but beneath him too, as if there were hollow spaces below the concrete. Then he heard another sound, footsteps that were not his own, far away at first, then slowly getting closer. Something was walking in the corridor behind him. He turned. The hallway stretched into dim yellow distance. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape moved under one of the lights. It stepped forward slowly. Its body was thin and long, its joints bending in wrong directions. Its skin looked pale gray in the sickly light. Its head hung forward slightly, like it wasn't used to standing upright. But its eyes were open, too open, wide black circles reflecting the bulbs above. Elias backed away. The thing did not run. It just kept walking toward him. Another shape appeared farther down the corridor behind it. Then another. The doors along the walls began opening wider, hinges groaning softly. Hands, long pale hands, slid around the door frames. Elias turned and ran again. The corridor twisted left after a few 100 meters, then right. Then it split into 3 identical hallways. He chose one randomly and sprinted down it. The breathing sounds grew louder the farther he went. The doors here were open wider, some completely open. He passed one room where something sat on the floor facing the wall, rocking slowly back and forth. Another where dozens of long arms crawled across the ceiling, like pale spiders. Elias didn't stop running. Eventually, the hallway opened into a massive underground chamber. Elias skidded to a halt. The room was enormous, like an abandoned subway station, but wrong. The ceiling was lost in darkness far above. Thick concrete pillars rose like tree trunks throughout the space, and everywhere across the floor were doors, thousands of them, standing upright in rows, not attached to walls, just doors, each one leading into darkness. Elias stepped forward cautiously. The floor was covered in thin dust, but he could see footprints everywhere, not human footprints, long, narrow ones, dragging marks. Something had been moving through here constantly. Then he saw something else. In the center of the chamber stood a single object under a bright white light. The package, the one he had delivered to apartment 1107. It now sat on a metal pedestal in the middle of the room. Elias frowned. "That's impossible," he whispered. He had left it upstairs. Slowly he approached the pedestal. The breathing sounds from the doors around the chamber grew quieter, as if the things inside were waiting, watching. The package looked exactly the same. Brown paper, long, narrow, no address now, just blank wrapping. Elias hesitated, but something pulled at his curiosity. He reached out and touched the paper. It was warm. Slowly he tore the wrapping open. Inside was a small black box, about the size of a book. It had no seams, no lid, just a smooth surface that seemed to absorb the light. The moment Elias lifted it from the pedestal, every door in the chamber slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder through the underground space. Then the breathing stopped, completely. Silence filled the chamber. Elias felt the box vibrate slightly in his hands. Then he heard whispering, not from the room, from inside the box. Hundreds of voices murmuring in languages he didn't recognize. The whispers grew louder. The surface of the box began to crack slowly, thin glowing lines spreading across it like fractures in glass. Elias dropped it. The box hit the floor. The cracks burst open. Darkness poured out. Not shadow. Something thicker, like black smoke made of liquid night. It spread across the floor rapidly, flowing between the rows of doors. From behind those doors came sudden pounding, violent, desperate. The doors shook as if the things behind them were trying to escape. One door burst open. A long, pale creature crawled out onto the floor. But the black darkness reached it first. The moment it touched the creature, the thing collapsed into dust. More doors burst open. Dozens of the creatures spilled out, their limbs bending wildly as they tried to run. But the darkness spread faster. Wherever it flowed, the creatures disintegrated instantly. Elias backed away in horror. The chamber filled with screams, high, distorted sounds that barely resembled voices. Within seconds, the black darkness had swallowed half the room. Then it stopped, completely still. The whispers faded. Silence returned. Elias looked around. The creatures were gone. Only gray dust covered the floor where they had been. In the center of the chamber, the cracked box lay motionless. Then something moved inside the darkness, pooling around it. A shape began to rise, slow, massive. Elias felt the ground tremble slightly as the thing stood. It was tall, far taller than any human. Its body formed from the same black substance that had poured from the box, shifting constantly like living smoke. Two glowing white shapes appeared where its eyes should be. They turned slowly toward Elias. The thing spoke. Its voice was not loud, but it echoed through the entire chamber. Delivery received. Elias couldn't move. His legs felt locked. The creature took one slow step toward him. The floor cracked beneath its weight. "Courier," the voice continued, "you have opened the gate." The darkness around the chamber began flowing outward toward the corridors, toward the stairwell, toward the city above. Elias suddenly understood something terrible. The things behind the doors hadn't been the worst part of this place. They had been prisoners. The box had been their lock, and he had just opened it. The creature took another step closer. The glowing white eyes brightened. "The city above," it said softly, "is very large. Far above them, beyond the layers of concrete and forgotten corridors, the lights of the sleeping city continued to glow. Cars moved through quiet streets. People slept in tall buildings. None of them knew that something ancient had just been delivered beneath their feet." The creature leaned closer to Elias. Its voice lowered to a whisper. "And we are very hungry." Elias stumbled backward as the towering figure of living darkness leaned closer. The glowing white eyes hovered in the shifting mass like two cold stars. The chamber trembled with each of its slow movements. The black substance that formed its body flowed outward across the concrete floor like a spreading tide. The rows of standing doors began to rot where the darkness touched them. Wood warped, metal hinges dissolved. Everything it touched seemed to decay instantly. Elias turned and ran. He sprinted across the chamber, weaving between the endless rows of doors. Behind him, the creature did not rush. It simply walked forward, but with every step the darkness spread farther, devouring the floor and pillars and anything left of the strange underground prison. Elias spotted a corridor at the far end of the chamber and dashed toward it. The passage was narrow and low, with cracked concrete walls and flickering bulbs strung along exposed wires. He ran through it without slowing. His lungs burned. His mind raced. He had to reach the stairwell. He had to get back to the street. But the corridor twisted again and again, branching into other tunnels. Some of them sloped upward. Others descended deeper underground. The city beneath the city stretched like a labyrinth. Elias chose the tunnels that climbed upward, taking stairs two at a time whenever he found them. The deeper he went into the maze, the more signs appeared that this place had once been something else. Old subway platforms buried behind brick walls, rusted maintenance tunnels, storage rooms filled with broken equipment. It was as if generations of construction had simply built over the forgotten layers of the city instead of removing them. And somewhere below it all, something ancient had been waiting. As Elias ran, the lights in the tunnels began to go out behind him one by one. Darkness rolled through the corridors like a slow wave. Sometimes he heard the creature's voice echo faintly through the concrete. "The city is open." Sometimes he heard other sounds, cracking stone, metal bending, something vast forcing its way through spaces not meant to hold it. Elias finally reached a heavy metal door marked emergency exit. He shoved it open and burst into another stairwell. This one looked newer, cleaner, painted walls, real fluorescent lights. He nearly collapsed with relief. He climbed the stairs as fast as he could. Floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. The building above must have been connected to Halberg Tower somehow through the underground structures. Elias didn't care. He just needed to reach the surface. When he pushed through the door at the top of the stairwell, cold night air hit his face. He stepped out into an alley. Rain was still falling. The city stretched around him, alive with distant lights and the hum of traffic. For a moment, Elias simply stood there, breathing. He had made it out. Cars passed at the end of the street. A neon sign flickered above a late-night diner. Somewhere, a siren wailed far away. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then the ground beneath his feet trembled slightly. Elias turned back toward the alley entrance. At first, nothing seemed different. Then a thin stream of black liquid seeped out from under the door he had just come through. It slid across the wet pavement like oil. More of it followed. The metal door began to bulge outward slowly, as if something massive were pressing against it from the other side. Elias backed away. The door exploded off its hinges. Darkness poured out into the alley. It spread across the walls, climbing upward like a living shadow. The towering figure emerged from the broken doorway, unfolding itself to its full height beneath the rain-soaked sky. The glowing white eyes turned toward the street. Cars drove past the end of the alley, their drivers unaware of the thing now standing less than 50 meters away. The creature looked up at the towering buildings around it. Thousands of windows filled the skyline. Behind those windows were people sleeping, watching television, working late shifts, living their ordinary lives. The creature spoke again. Its voice seemed to vibrate through the entire block. A city of millions. Elias ran toward the street, shouting desperately, "Hey, hey, run, get out of here." A taxi slowed near the corner, the driver staring at him in confusion. Then the darkness spilled out of the alley and onto the road. The streetlights flickered and died instantly. The taxi driver's headlights illuminated the creature fully for the first time. The driver's face twisted in terror. He slammed the accelerator and sped away, tires screeching. But the darkness had already begun spreading down the street. It moved along the pavement, crawling up buildings, sliding through sewer grates, pouring into subway entrances. Within seconds, the entire block lost power. Windows went dark. People began shouting from inside apartments as their lights died. Elias looked up. The black tide was climbing the skyscrapers now, flowing up their sides like ink across glass. And from deep within it, shapes were forming. The creatures that had once been trapped behind the doors were returning, but they were different now. Larger, faster, freed. One dropped from the side of a building onto the street below, landing with a wet crack of bending limbs. It turned its head slowly toward Elias. Its wide black eyes reflected the faint city glow. Then it began running toward him. Elias ran again, through intersections, across empty streets, past closed shops and dark apartment towers. Behind him, the city was changing. Block by block, the lights vanished as the darkness spread outward from District 12. Sirens began to rise everywhere now. Police cars raced down avenues. Helicopters circled overhead. But none of them understood what they were facing. Elias finally reached a crowded night bus stop, where a handful of tired commuters waited under a shelter. They stared at him as he ran toward them, soaked with rain and panic. "You have to leave," he shouted. "All of you, now!" One of them started to laugh nervously. "Buddy, you okay?" Then the power across the entire avenue went out. The streetlights died. The traffic signals went dark. The commuters turned slowly toward the skyline. A massive wall of moving darkness was rising above the buildings several blocks away, and within it, Countless white eyes were beginning to open. Elias whispered to himself, his voice shaking. I delivered it. The ground trembled again as something enormous moved within the spreading shadow. In the distance, the creature's voice echoed once more across the city. The night belongs to us now. And the millions of people living in the city were just beginning to realize that something had come up from beneath their streets. Something that had been waiting longer than the city itself. Something that would not stop spreading until every light in the skyline had gone out.
The city that forgot the sun. No one remembers exactly when the city became dark. The official records say the power grid collapsed during a winter storm 37 years ago. Others say the government abandoned the place after the factories closed. But those explanations never made sense, because even when generators arrived, even when people brought their own lights, the darkness remained. The city was called Black Ridge once. Now people simply call it the Old City, and at night almost no one goes there, except for those who don't know better, or those who have no choice. Marcus didn't believe the stories. Urban legends were everywhere. Cities swallowed by shadows, whispers in alleyways, missing travelers. But Marcus had spent the last 6 months documenting abandoned places across Europe, and every town had its own ghost story. This was just another one. His camera sat on the passenger seat as he drove down the cracked highway leading into Black Ridge. The headlights cut through drifting fog that rolled slowly across the road like breathing smoke. The GPS had already failed 20 minutes earlier, but he could see the skyline now. Tall buildings, broken windows, no lights, not a single one. Marcus frowned. That's strange. Even abandoned cities usually had something. A security light, a passing car, a distant apartment glow. Black Ridge looked like a photograph taken at midnight, and then forgotten. He pulled the car to a stop near a rusted sign. Welcome to Black Ridge. Population. The number had been scratched away. Marcus grabbed his camera. This is Marcus Hale, he said into the microphone, beginning his recording. Urban exploration log, night entry. I've just arrived at Black Ridge. He panned the camera toward the skyline. Locals claim the city's been uninhabited for decades. They also say the darkness here is different. He laughed softly. Let's find out. Marcus stepped out of the car. The moment his boots touched the road, something felt wrong. The air was colder. Not normal cold. Dead cold. The kind that belonged underground. The road into the city stretched between silent buildings. Marcus turned on his flashlight. The beam illuminated cracked pavement and rows of abandoned storefronts. A grocery store, a pharmacy. pharmacy, a movie theater with a faded poster still clinging to the wall. The title read, "Last Showing." The paint had peeled away so badly, it almost looked like the letters were bleeding down the wall. Marcus moved slowly, filming everything. The silence was heavy. Cities usually made noise, even empty ones. Wind, rats, loose metal signs clanging somewhere in the distance. But Blackridge was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Marcus kept walking. His flashlight beams slid across windows, doors, and dark alleys that stretched like open mouths between buildings. Then he heard it. Footsteps. He froze. The sound stopped. Marcus slowly turned the camera behind him. Nothing. Just the road, the fog, and the darkness. Probably echo, he muttered. He kept walking. The footsteps returned. One step, then another, exactly matching his pace. Marcus stopped again. The sound stopped again. His chest tightened. "Hello," he called. No answer. He shined his light down the street. Empty. Completely empty. Marcus forced a laugh. Okay, that's creepy. He began walking faster. The footsteps followed, perfectly synchronized, step for step. Marcus spun around suddenly, shining the flashlight wildly behind him. Nothing. No person. No animal. Just the empty road fading into darkness. Then he noticed something strange. His footprints in the dust. There were two sets. One set belonged to him. The other was walking beside him. Marcus stared at the ground. The second set of footprints ended exactly where he stood. Slowly, very slowly, another footprint appeared in the dust beside him. No shoe, no leg, just the shape pressing itself into the ground as if something invisible had stepped forward. Marcus stumbled backward. The camera shook in his hands. Another footprint formed, and another. Something was walking toward him. He turned and ran. The street stretched endlessly ahead of him. His breathing echoed between the buildings as he sprinted past broken storefronts and empty intersections. Behind him, the invisible footsteps began to run too. Faster, closer. Marcus reached an intersection and darted into an alley. His flashlight beam flickered wildly across brick walls and piles of trash. He kept running until the footsteps suddenly stopped. Marcus slowed down, then stopped. The alley was silent again, completely silent. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Okay. Maybe there's someone messing with me. But deep down, Marcus knew that wasn't true. Because when he looked at the ground again, the footprints were gone. All of them, even his own. The dust was perfectly smooth, as if no one had walked there in years. A sound drifted through the darkness, a distant creaking. Marcus turned the camera towards the end of the alley. There was a door, an old metal door built into the side of a building. It was slowly swinging open and closed, open and closed. Creak, creak, creak. Marcus approached it carefully. The flashlight beam revealed faded letters above the door. Blackridge Transit Station. Subway entrance, Marcus whispered. He looked back toward the empty street. The darkness outside seemed thicker now. Closer, like fog pressing against glass. The door creaked open again. From below came a faint sound. A voice. Marcus froze. Someone was speaking down there. A whisper. Too quiet to understand, but definitely human. "Hello," Marcus called. The whispering stopped. Silence returned. Then the voice spoke again. Clearer this time. "You shouldn't be here." Marcus stepped closer to the doorway. "Who's down there?" No answer. Just darkness descending down a staircase into the earth. Marcus hesitated. Then he raised his camera, This is Marcus Hale, entering the Blackridge Transit Station. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the stairwell. Marcus spun around and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. The door was locked from the outside. The staircase led down into darkness, so thick the flashlight barely cut through it. Dust covered everything: the handrails, the walls, the floor. It looked like no one had used the station in decades. But as Marcus reached the bottom step, he saw something strange. Fresh footprints in the dust, dozens of them, leading into the tunnel. Marcus slowly followed them. The station platform stretched into shadow on both sides. Old train tracks disappeared into black tunnels. A flickering sign hung above the platform. It still had power somehow. The letters glowed faintly. Last train arrives at midnight. Marcus checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. The whispering voice returned, this time right behind him. You shouldn't have come here. Marcus spun around. No one was there. But something moved in the darkness at the edge of the platform. A shape. Tall, thin, unnatural. His flashlight flickered. The shape vanished. Marcus backed away slowly. Who's there? The whisper answered from everywhere at once. We waited so long. The lights above the platform flickered, then turned off. Total darkness swallowed the station. Somewhere in the tunnel, metal wheels began to turn. A train was coming, but Blackridge hadn't had power in 37 years. Marcus heard footsteps again, hundreds of them, surrounding him in the dark. Then something cold brushed against his shoulder. A whisper breathed into his ear. The city was never empty. The train roared out of the tunnel with no lights, no driver, and no windows. The doors slid open with a metallic scream. And inside, the seats were full of silent shapes sitting perfectly still in the darkness, waiting for one more passenger. Marcus screamed. The camera fell to the floor, and the recording ended there. The camera was found 3 weeks later by a group of hikers who wandered too close to Blackridge. The footage was still intact. The last frame showed the train doors slowly closing. And just before the darkness swallowed everything, a face appeared in the window. Marcus Hale. His eyes were wide, his mouth open in a silent scream, and behind him, hundreds of pale figures staring directly at the camera. The train departed into the tunnel. It never came back. Locals say that sometimes, on quiet nights, you can hear a train passing beneath the old city. But there are no tracks connected to the outside world anymore. And if you stand very still, you might hear footsteps walking beside you, even when no one is there. And if you ever see the sign that reads, "Last train arrives at midnight," do not wait for it. Because the train in Blackridge only runs one way, and once you board it, the city never lets you leave. No one knows exactly what happened after the camera stopped recording. But the story of Blackridge didn't end there. In fact, the camera only made things worse. The hikers who found it brought the footage to the nearest town, a place called Alders Creek. They showed it to the police first. The police said it was fake. Then they watched it again, and again. By the fourth time, none of them were laughing anymore. The recording clearly showed Marcus entering the city. It showed the empty streets, the footprints appearing beside him, the station stairs, the platform, and the train. But something in the footage disturbed them more than the obvious horror. Every time they replayed the last sealed the recording and told the hikers to forget what they had seen. They claimed the video was part of an elaborate internet hoax, but the hikers knew what they heard in the recording. When Marcus dropped the camera and the train doors began closing, there was a sound buried beneath the noise of the tracks. Hundreds of voices whispering together in perfect unison. Stay. A week later, one of the hikers disappeared. His name was Daniel Kraus. He was the one who had actually picked up the camera in the alley outside the transit station. His friends said Daniel had been acting strangely after they watched the footage. He kept pausing the video at certain frames, staring into the dark corners of the screen. Once he said something that chilled everyone in the room. "They're not passengers," Daniel whispered. "They're residents." 2 nights later, Daniel left his apartment at 11:30 p.m. His neighbor saw him walking down the street, carrying a flashlight and a backpack. He looked calm, almost peaceful. When the neighbor asked where he was going so late, Daniel smiled and said something that didn't make sense. "I think I missed my train." He was never seen again. After Daniel vanished, people in Alders Creek began reporting strange things. Footsteps behind them when they walked home at night. Soft whispers in empty rooms. Dark shapes standing at the ends of streets before melting away into shadows. One woman swore she saw a train pass through the woods behind her house at midnight. But there were no tracks there, just trees and dirt. The police tried to dismiss the stories as paranoia, until Officer Lena Moritz made a mistake. She decided to watch the footage alone. It was 11:45 p.m. when she started the recording in the station office. By the time the train appeared in the video, Lena had leaned closer to the screen, studying the passengers. Something about them looked wrong. Their bodies were still, but their heads were slightly tilted toward the camera, as if they knew someone was watching. Lena paused the video. Then she zoomed in on one of the faces near the train door. Her stomach twisted. The face belonged to Daniel Kraus. But Daniel had only disappeared 2 days earlier. And in the footage, the passengers looked like they had been sitting there for decades. Lena leaned back slowly in her chair. That's impossible. The screen flickered. At first, she thought the video had glitched. But then she realized something terrifying. The movement wasn't coming from the video. It was coming from behind her. The station office had a large window overlooking the parking lot. Lena turned slowly in her chair. The parking lot lights flickered weakly in the fog outside. At first, she saw nothing. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and shapes appeared in the mist. People standing perfectly still. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were scattered across the parking lot, their faces hidden in shadow. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Lena's heart began to pound. She stood up slowly and stepped closer to the window. The figures remained motionless. Then one of them stepped forward. Just one step. The sound of the movement echoed faintly through the glass. Lena felt her throat tighten. She grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Moritz. I think I have." The radio crackled violently with static, and beneath the static, a whisper emerged. The same whisper from the video. "Stay." The parking lot lights shut off all at once. Darkness swallowed the figures outside. Lena backed away from the window. Her breathing was loud in the silent office. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, approaching the door. The knob began doorway. One step, then another. Something invisible had entered the room. Lena fired 3 shots. The bullets punched holes into the far wall. The footsteps didn't stop. They kept coming closer, right up to the desk, right up to her. Then the whisper spoke again, right beside her ear. The city remembers. The police report from that night was short. Officer Lena Moritz was listed as missing. The office door had been locked from the inside. Her gun was found on the floor, with 3 bullets missing. The security camera footage showed nothing entering the room, nothing leaving. Just Lena standing there alone, until she suddenly vanished from the frame. The video cut out exactly at midnight. Months passed after Lena disappeared. Alders Creek grew quieter. Fewer people stayed out late. Some families moved away entirely. The road leading to Blackridge was eventually closed with concrete barriers and warning signs. But warnings rarely stop curiosity, especially the kind that grows on the internet. The footage of Marcus Hale eventually leaked online. Millions watched it. Most people thought it was a brilliant horror short film. But a small group of viewers noticed something disturbing. Every time someone uploaded the video to a new website, the ending changed slightly. At first, the train passengers were just shapes. Then faces started appearing more clearly in the windows. Faces that weren't there before. Some viewers claimed they recognized those faces. Missing persons. People who had vanished over the years in different towns across the region. By the 10th upload, something else appeared in the footage. A tall figure standing at the far end of the platform. Its body stretched unnaturally thin. Its arms hanging far below its knees. Its face was never visible. It just stood there, watching Marcus, watching the train, watching the camera. The comments under the video exploded with theories, but no one noticed the most important detail. With every new upload, the train looked slightly more full. 3 years after Marcus disappeared, a truck driver named Elias Voss broke through the barrier on the Black Ridge Road during a snowstorm. His GPS had malfunctioned, and he was desperate to find shelter. The storm howled across the highway as he drove into the silent city. At first, he thought the place was abandoned, like the stories said. But as he drove deeper into the streets, he noticed lights flickering in the distance. Dim, yellow, moving slowly through the fog. Elias followed the lights until he reached the center of the city. There, in the middle of the main street, stood a subway entrance. A faded sign above the stairs read, Black Ridge Transit Station. And beneath it, another sign flickered weakly. Last train arrives at midnight. Elias checked the clock in his truck. 11:59 p.m. He stepped out into the snow. The wind died instantly. The entire city fell silent. Somewhere beneath the ground, metal wheels began to turn. Elias felt the vibration through the pavement. A train was coming. He turned toward the station entrance slowly. And from the darkness below the stairs, dozens of pale faces were staring up at him, waiting. And deep in the tunnel behind them, the tall shadow moved closer to the platform. The train doors opened just in time. Because in Black Ridge, the last train always arrives exactly when someone new enters the city, and it always leaves full. Elias Voss stood at the top of the subway stairs, while snow drifted silently across the empty street behind him. The storm that had pushed him off the highway had suddenly gone quiet, as if the weather itself refused to cross deeper into Blackridge. The only sound now was the distant grinding of metal beneath the ground. The train was still moving through the tunnels. Elias gripped his flashlight tightly. "Hello," he called down the stairwell. His voice echoed into the darkness below and disappeared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the pale faces at the bottom step slowly tilted upward. The face belonged to a woman with hollow eyes and gray skin stretched tight across her bones. Her lips moved slightly. No sound came out, but Elias somehow understood the word she mouthed. Late. The flashlight trembled in his hand. "What?" he whispered. More faces appeared behind the woman. Dozens of them crowded together in the darkness beneath the station lights. They were standing shoulder to shoulder on the platform, their bodies unnaturally still. None of them blinked, none of them breathed, yet all of them were staring directly at him. The grinding noise grew louder. Wind rushed upward from the tunnel, carrying the smell of rust and cold earth. The woman at the bottom of the stairs lifted one pale arm and pointed downward toward the platform, slowly, patiently, as if inviting him to come closer. Elias shook his head. "No, I'm not going down there." The woman's mouth opened wider this time. The other figures around her began whispering together in the same low voice Marcus had recorded years earlier. "Late, late, late." Elias stepped back from the stairs. His boots scraped against the frozen pavement. For a second, he thought about turning around and running back to the truck. But when he looked behind him, the street was gone. The road he had driven down had disappeared into thick darkness. The buildings on both sides leaned inward, like walls closing around him. And somewhere far above the rooftops, the clouds blocked out the stars. The city had sealed itself. Elias turned back toward the subway entrance with a rising sense of dread. The whispering voices were louder now. The figures below the stairs had begun to move slightly, their heads turning together as if listening for something. The grinding metal sound became a roar. The train burst from the tunnel below with a violent screech. The platform lights flickered to life. Elias could see the train clearly now. It was old, far older than any subway train he had ever seen. Its metal sides were blackened and scarred with rust. The windows were cloudy and scratched, as if something had tried to claw its way out from inside. The doors slid open with a long metallic scream. Every passenger inside turned their heads toward the stairwell. Elias staggered backward. There were hundreds of them packed inside the train cars. Their bodies sat rigid in the seats while their faces stared upward toward him in perfect silence. Some of the passengers looked decades old, their skin gray and thin like dried paper. Others looked more recent. A young man wearing a hiking jacket, a police officer with a broken badge pinned to her uniform, a man holding a camera that hung loosely from his neck. Marcus Hale's eyes stared blankly through the window, frozen in the same expression captured in the final frame of his recording. Elias felt his legs weaken. "This isn't real," he whispered. "This can't be real." The whispering from the platform suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell across the station. Then a new voice spoke from deep inside the train. Slow, calm, ancient. "You are late." The voice did not echo like a human voice should. It seemed to come from every direction at once. From the train cars, from the tunnel walls, from the darkness above the city itself. Elias stepped closer to the top stair without realizing it. Something about the voice pulled at him, like gravity pulling water downhill. I didn't mean to come here, Elias said quietly. The passengers inside the train tilted their heads slightly. Their movements were perfectly synchronized. Everyone means to come here, the voice answered. The tall shadow appeared at the far end of the platform. It slowly stepped forward into the flickering station lights. Elias felt his stomach drop. The thing was taller than any human, its body long and crooked, like a broken lamppost. Its arms hung so low they nearly touched the ground. Its skin looked like black smoke stretched thin across bones. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness. The city calls, the voice continued, and eventually, everyone answers. Elias tried to move backward again, but his feet refused to cooperate. His body felt heavy, like invisible hands were pressing down on his shoulders. "No," he whispered desperately. "I'm leaving." The tall shadow moved another step closer. The passengers inside the train leaned slightly toward the doors. "Waiting. You already arrived," the voice replied. Elias suddenly noticed something strange about the snow falling around him. The flakes stopped moving the moment they crossed the station entrance, frozen in the air, suspended between moments. Time itself had slowed. The city had trapped him inside its breath. The tall shadow lifted one long arm and pointed toward the open train doors. "Last train," the voice said, "always on time." The passengers began whispering again. This time the word was different. "Stay." Elias screamed and forced his legs to move. He turned and ran toward the street, toward the truck, toward anything that wasn't the train. But the moment he reached the edge of the sidewalk, he stopped abruptly. The road was gone. In its place was a deep black void stretching between the buildings, a bottomless darkness where the city streets used to be. The entire world beyond the station had vanished. Behind him, the train doors began to close slowly. Elias felt panic explode in his chest. "Wait!" he shouted. The doors paused. The whispering voices grew louder again. Late, but not gone. Elias turned slowly back toward the platform. The tall shadow stood beside the train now, its long arms still extended toward the entrance. The doors slid open again with a grinding shriek. An empty seat waited just inside the first car. Elias realized something horrifying. There was exactly one seat open. The whispering voices became gentle, almost comforting. "You belong somewhere," they murmured. "Everyone belongs somewhere." Elias felt tears forming in his eyes. His mind raced through memories of long highways, empty motels, endless nights spent driving alone across countries that never felt like home. The whispering continued. "No more roads," the voices promised. "No more searching." Elias stepped down the first stair. The passengers inside the train smiled faintly. Another step. The tall shadow lowered its arms slowly as if welcoming him. Another step. The train lights flickered softly across the platform. Elias reached the bottom stair. The whispering faded into silence. The tall shadow moved aside to let him pass. Elias walked through the open doors and sat in the empty seat. The moment he did, the train doors slammed shut. train began moving immediately. No driver, no signal, just the grinding sound of wheels pulling the heavy cars back into the tunnel. As the train disappeared into the darkness, the passengers returned to perfect stillness. Elias stared forward, breathing slowly. Across the aisle, Marcus Hale sat with his camera still hanging around his neck, his head turned slightly toward Elias. His lips moved just enough to form a whisper. "You hear it too, don't you?" Elias frowned. "Hear what?" Marcus's empty eyes stared into the darkness beyond the window. Far ahead in the tunnel, another station light flickered faintly in the distance. And somewhere deeper beneath the city, countless other voices whispered through the endless underground. The next train coming. Because Black Ridge was never just one city. It was only the first stop. And the train never stops running.
The old apartment building stood between two tall modern offices, forgotten by time and everyone who worked around it. People said it had been built before the war, but no one seemed to know exactly when or by whom. When the city lights flickered on at night, the building looked different. Its windows dark, its balconies leaning like old bones. Some claimed they had sometimes seen a shadow standing on the fourth-floor balcony, even though that floor had been empty for years. Jonas, a new journalist in the city, didn't believe in rumors. He was looking for a cheap place, and the landlord offered him room 407 for almost nothing. "The elevator stops working after midnight," the old landlord said quietly, "so just use the stairs." Jonas laughed it off and moved in the same day. The apartment smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, like old coins. At night, the pipes groaned inside the walls, but that was normal for old buildings. The first strange thing happened at 2:17 a.m. Jonas woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging, back and forth in front of his door. He opened it. The hallway was empty. The flickering ceiling light hummed softly. The second night, the footsteps returned. This time, they stopped directly outside his door. Then 3 slow knocks echoed through the wood. Jonas checked the hallway again. No one. But at the end of the corridor, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A door, painted the same color as the wall, marked 408. The landlord had told him his was the last apartment on the floor. The next morning, Jonas asked about it. The landlord's face went pale. "There is no 408, he whispered. That night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time, it came from inside Jonas's apartment door. The knocking came again. 3 slow knocks from the inside of the door. Jonas froze in bed, staring at the dark outline of the apartment. The digital clock beside him still glowed 2:17 a.m. He held his breath. Another knock echoed softly through the wood, as if someone stood in the hallway and yet somehow inside the apartment at the same time. Jonas forced himself up. The wooden floor creaked under his feet as he approached the door. The hallway light leaked faintly through the crack beneath it. For several seconds he stood there, hand hovering over the handle. Then he opened it. The hallway was empty, long, silent. The flickering bulb hummed above. But something was wrong. The air felt colder than before, and at the far end of the corridor the wall looked different. Jonas squinted. The outline of the hidden door was clearer now. Apartment 408. The number looked scratched into the paint, as if someone had carved it with a knife. Jonas stepped into the hallway. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked toward the door. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to thicken. By the time he stood in front of it, he felt a strange pressure in his chest. The handle was old brass, cold. He touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, something moved behind the door. A soft, dragging sound, like bare feet sliding slowly across the floor. Jonas jerked his hand back. He told himself it was just another tenant. Maybe the landlord lied about the apartment being empty. Maybe someone moved in recently. Still, the sound of dragging footsteps continued for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. Jonas stepped back toward his own apartment. Just as he reached his door, a faint whisper drifted through the hallway. It sounded like a voice speaking through water. Jonas. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned slowly toward apartment 408. The whisper came again. Jonas. Open. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, the hallway looked normal again. In daylight, the wall at the end of the corridor appeared completely flat. No door, no number. Jonas stood there for a long time, running his hand across the paint. Smooth plaster, nothing else. When he told the landlord what happened, the old man refused to look at him. "You heard knocking?" he asked quietly. Jonas nodded. The landlord sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Then it knows your name now." Jonas laughed nervously. "What does?" The landlord didn't answer. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. That night, Jonas tried to stay awake. He made coffee and sat at his desk pretending to work. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. The building remained silent except for the groaning pipes in the walls. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the power went out. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. The clock died, the refrigerator stopped humming, and from the hallway came the sound again. Dragging footsteps. Slowly approaching his door, Jonas felt his throat tighten. The steps stopped outside. 3 knocks, slow, hollow. Jonas didn't move. The knocking came again, then the whisper returned. "Jonas, please." The voice sounded closer now, almost against the door. Trembling, Jonas grabbed the flashlight from his phone and stepped into the hallway. The beam cut through the darkness, and there it was. The door to apartment 408 stood clearly at the end of the corridor, but this time it was open, just a few inches. Darkness pooled inside the room like thick smoke. Something shifted in the shadows. Jonas took a step closer. The whisper floated out again. "You opened first." Suddenly, the hallway light flickered back on. Jonas flinched. The door to 408 slammed shut. The number vanished instantly, leaving only blank wall behind. Jonas stumbled back toward his apartment. His hands were shaking violently now. The next day, he searched the building's records at the city library. The apartment complex had been built in 1924. For decades, it housed factory workers and their families. But something strange appeared in the old documents. In 1977, the building lost one of its tenants. A woman named Marta Keller disappeared from apartment 407. No body was ever found. The apartment had been sealed for years afterward. Jonas stared at the record. He was living in 407. That night, he returned home with a growing sense of dread. The hallway felt longer than before. The lights flickered again. And as he passed the far wall, he noticed something new. A faint handprint pressed into the paint, as if someone inside the wall had pushed outward. Jonas backed away slowly. Then he heard it, scratching, from inside the wall. A long, dragging scrape, moving toward his apartment. He rushed inside and slammed the door. The scratching continued, slow, patient. It stopped directly beside his bed. For several minutes there was silence. Then 3 soft knocks came from the wall itself. Jonas pressed his ear against the plaster. Something whispered from the other side. "You opened first." The temperature in the room dropped sharply. The wall bulged slightly inward. A crack spread across the paint like a spider web, and from inside that crack, a pale finger slowly pushed through. Jonas screamed and stumbled back. The finger twitched as if testing the air. Then another finger emerged, and another. Soon, an entire hand forced its way through the wall, skin gray and stretched tight across the bones. Jonas grabbed a chair and smashed it against the plaster. The wall broke open with a thunderous crack. Behind it was not brick or insulation. It was a dark, empty room. Apartment 408, the same room that only appeared at night. Inside the darkness stood a figure, thin, motionless, watching him. Its face was completely blank except for a wide, smiling mouth, and when it spoke, it used Jonas's own voice. "Now you live here too." The hallway lights flickered violently. Jonas tried to run toward the door, but the apartment seemed to stretch longer with every step. The doorway moved farther away. Behind him, the figure from 408 stepped slowly into the room. Its feet dragged across the floor exactly like the footsteps he had heard every night. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas finally reached the door and yanked it open. The hallway beyond looked wrong. The walls were older, the paint peeled. The lights hung broken from the ceiling. It looked like the building decades ago. And every apartment door along the hallway was open. Inside, each one stood a motionless figure. Watching him, waiting. At the far end of the corridor stood the landlord, but he looked younger and terrified. "You shouldn't have answered the knocking," the landlord whispered. The dragging footsteps came closer behind Jonas. "It needed someone new," the landlord said. "Someone in 407. The lights burst. The hallway plunged into darkness again. And somewhere in that darkness, 3 slow knocks echoed through the building. Jonas stood frozen in the darkness. The hallway smelled damp, like mold and old wood that had been sealed away for decades. Somewhere behind him, the dragging footsteps continued. Drag. Step. Drag. Step. The sound echoed slowly through the corridor, growing closer. The landlord's younger face looked pale in the faint light leaking from a broken fixture on the ceiling. "Don't move," he whispered. Jonas tried to speak, but his throat felt dry and tight. What is that thing?" he asked quietly. The landlord shook his head slowly. "It wasn't always like this." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the building fell completely silent. Jonas felt a cold breath brush against the back of his neck. Then the whisper returned, soft and stretched, like someone speaking through a cracked speaker. "Jonas, stay." Jonas turned. The hallway behind him was empty again. Apartment 407 stood open. Inside, the room looked darker than before, as if the shadows inside had thickened. "You have to leave the floor," the landlord said urgently. "If it reaches you again, you won't come back." Jonas didn't hesitate. He ran. His shoes pounded against the wooden floor as he rushed down the hallway toward the staircase. The open apartment doors blurred past him. Inside each one, the silent figures remained perfectly still, their heads slowly turning to follow him as he passed. Some looked like ordinary people. Others looked wrong, faces too pale, eyes too wide, mouths frozen open as if mid-scream. Jonas reached the stairwell and pushed the heavy door open. The staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The lights here were dead. Only the faint glow from the hallway illuminated the first few steps. "Keep going," the landlord whispered behind him. "Don't stop." Jonas began descending. His footsteps echoed through the stairwell. One floor, then another. But something was wrong. The stairwell felt deeper than it should have been. The building only had 6 floors. Yet Jonas kept running down steps that never seemed to end. After several minutes, he stopped, breathing heavily. The darkness below him remained endless. Slowly, he looked up. The landlord was gone. The door to the 4th floor had vanished. Only a blank concrete wall remained where it should have been. Then the dragging sound returned. Above him, drag, step, drag, step. Something was coming down the stairs. Jonas's heart pounded wildly. He rushed downward again, taking the steps 2 at a time. The footsteps followed him, never rushing, never stopping, just slowly descending behind him. Finally, Jonas saw a faint light below. The lobby. Relief flooded through him as he burst through the stairwell door. But the lobby looked wrong. The furniture was old. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling. The front desk looked decades older than the one he had seen earlier that day. Behind the desk sat a man reading a newspaper. The man slowly lowered it. Jonas froze. It was the landlord again, but this version looked even younger, maybe 30 years old. The man stared at him with confusion. "Can I help you?" Jonas struggled to breathe. "What year is it?" he asked. The landlord frowned. 1977. Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. That was the year Marta Keller disappeared. Behind him, the stairwell door creaked open slowly. Drag, step, drag, step. The landlord looked toward the sound. "Who's there?" he asked. A long gray hand appeared around the edge of the stairwell door. The landlord's expression changed instantly to horror. "No," he whispered, "not again." Jonas grabbed the front door and pulled it open. Cold night air rushed inside. Outside, the city looked different. The buildings were older, the streetlights dimmer. Cars from another era lined the road. Jonas ran into the street. The apartment building towered behind him, its windows dark except for one. 4th floor. Apartment 407. A shadow stood inside the window watching him. Then the shape slowly lifted its arm and knocked against the glass. 3 slow taps echoed faintly through the night. Jonas stumbled backward. The front door of the building slammed shut behind him. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the window of apartment 407 opened slowly. A pale face leaned out. It looked exactly like Jonas. The copy of him smiled widely into the street, and from inside the building, the knocking began again. Jonas stared at the window, his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. The face looking down at him from apartment 407 was his own. Same eyes, same hair, same terrified expression, except for the smile. The thing in the window smiled far wider than any human could. Its lips stretched unnaturally across its face as it lifted its hand and knocked against the glass again. Tap, 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 3 slow knocks. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Jonas stumbled backward until he nearly fell into the road. "No," he whispered. The figure in the window tilted its head as if studying him. Then it slowly stepped back into the darkness of the apartment. The window shut. The building returned to complete silence. For several minutes, Jonas simply stood there breathing heavily. The city around him looked wrong. The street lamps were dim yellow bulbs instead of the bright white lights he remembered. The cars parked along the curb were old models with wide chrome bumpers. Even the storefront signs looked decades out of date. He had somehow stepped into the past. Into the same year, the woman from apartment 407 disappeared. 1977. Jonas looked back at the apartment building. The structure seemed heavier somehow, as if time itself pressed down on its walls. Every window looked dark now, every balcony empty, but he could still feel it watching him. Suddenly, a voice spoke behind him. "You saw it too." Jonas spun around. A woman stood near the sidewalk under a street lamp. She looked pale and exhausted, her dark hair hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her clothes looked old-fashioned. Wide collar, long coat. For a moment, Jonas didn't recognize her. Then he remembered the photograph from the city records. Marta Keller, the missing tenant. Jonas stopped himself. Marta looked at the building with hollow eyes. "I know that look," she said quietly. "It's the same one I had when I first saw it wearing my face." Jonas felt a chill run through him. "It copied you too?" Marta nodded slowly. "That thing in the building doesn't just haunt the apartments. It replaces people." Jonas swallowed. "How?" Marta pointed toward the fourth-floor window. It waits for someone to answer the knocking. The wind rustled softly through the empty street. Jonas thought about the first night in his apartment. The 3 knocks on the door. The whisper calling his name. Once you respond, Marta continued, it learns who you are. And then? Jonas asked. Marta looked directly at him. Then it takes your place. Jonas felt his stomach drop. But you're still here. Marta shook her head slowly. Not really. She lifted her sleeve. Her arm looked strangely faded in the lamplight, almost translucent around the edges. I never left the building, she whispered. None of us did. Jonas suddenly noticed something horrifying. The street was too quiet. There were no people, no moving cars, no sounds of a living city. It was as if the world outside the apartment building had been drained of life. This isn't the real city, is it? Jonas asked. Marta shook her head again. It's the building's memory. Jonas turned back toward the apartment. The fourth-floor light flickered on again. The silhouette of his double appeared in the window. But now it wasn't alone. Other shapes stood behind it. Dozens of them. Faces pressed against the glass. Some looked terrified, others completely empty. Those are the ones it replaced, Marta said quietly. Every person who lived there. Jonas stepped backward slowly. Then how do we stop it? Marta's eyes darkened. You can't stop it. She pointed toward the entrance of the building. The front door had opened again by itself. The lobby beyond was dark. But there might be a way to escape. Jonas looked at the door, then back at her. You want me to go back inside? Marta nodded. The thing that replaces us lives in apartment 408. The room that shouldn't exist. Jonas felt his heart pound again. If you destroy that room, the building might release us. A long silence followed. The wind blew colder through the street. From the fourth floor came a faint sound, drag, step, drag, step. The thing wearing Jonas's face had started moving again, and it was heading toward the stairs. Marta looked at him urgently. You don't have much time. Once it reaches the street... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jonas took a deep breath and looked at the open door of the apartment building. The darkness inside seemed deeper than before. Waiting. Behind him, somewhere inside the stairwell, the dragging footsteps had begun descending again. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas clenched his fists. Then he ran back toward the building. Jonas slowed as he reached the open doorway of the apartment building. The darkness inside seemed thicker than before, like fog that had settled into every corner of the lobby. For a moment, he hesitated on the threshold. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and wet stone. Behind him, the empty street remained silent. When he looked back, Marta was still standing under the street lamp, but she appeared even more faded now, her outline barely visible against the dim light. Remember, she said softly, don't answer if it knocks again. Jonas nodded and stepped inside. The lobby door shut behind him with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the building like a distant drum. The young landlord was still behind the desk, staring nervously at the stairwell door. His face lit with confusion when he saw Jonas return. You left, the landlord said. Why did you come back? Jonas hurried to the desk. "There's something in this building," he said breathlessly. "Something in apartment 408. The landlord's face drained of color. "You've seen it," Jonas nodded. "And it's coming down the stairs." As if on cue, a faint dragging sound echoed from the stairwell again. "Drag, step, drag, step." The landlord stood up quickly. His chair scraped across the floor. "Then we don't have much time," he said. "It never comes this far unless it's ready." Jonas grabbed the edge of the desk. "Ready for what?" The landlord looked toward the stairwell door. "To replace someone." The dragging steps grew slightly louder. The landlord moved around the desk and grabbed a ring of old keys hanging on the wall. "If you want to stop it," he said quickly, "you have to reach the 4th floor before it does." Jonas stared at him. "You know about apartment 408? The landlord hesitated for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "The door didn't appear until the night Marta disappeared." Jonas felt a chill. "What happened that night?" The landlord swallowed. She heard knocking too. The stairwell door rattled slightly as something touched it from the other side. Drag, step, drag, step. Jonas backed away from the door. "Then we need to go," he said urgently. The landlord nodded. Together they rushed up the staircase. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they climbed. The stairwell lights flickered weakly above them. Jonas counted the floors as they passed them. 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. When they reached the 4th floor landing, both men stopped. The hallway looked exactly like Jonas remembered. Long, narrow, silent. The ceiling light flickered slowly, casting uneven shadows across the walls. At the far end of the corridor, the door to apartment 408 was visible again. This time it stood fully open. Darkness spilled out of the doorway like thick smoke. Jonas felt a cold wind drifting from inside the room. "That wasn't open before," the landlord whispered. Jonas nodded slowly. "It wants us to come in." From somewhere below them came the dragging footsteps again. They were climbing the stairs now. Drag, step, drag, step. The landlord gripped the keys tightly. "We don't have time," he said. Jonas took a deep breath and started down the hallway toward apartment 408. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder the closer he got to the door. When he reached the entrance, he stopped. The inside of the apartment looked impossibly dark. No walls, no furniture, just a deep shadow stretching inward. "How big is that room?" Jonas whispered. The landlord shook his head slowly. "Bigger than the building." Jonas stepped inside. The darkness swallowed the hallway behind him almost immediately. The landlord followed, closing the door halfway as if hoping to keep whatever was coming out. For several seconds they both stood in silence. Then Jonas's phone flashlight flickered on. The beam revealed something strange. The apartment interior looked like a distorted copy of the building's hallway. Doors lined both sides of the space, stretching far into the darkness. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each door had a number on it. 101, 202, 305, 407. Jonas felt his stomach twist. "These are apartments," he said quietly. The landlord nodded slowly. "Every person who ever lived here." Jonas stepped closer to one of the doors. It was labeled 407, his apartment. He reached for the handle but stopped. Something moved behind him. Drag, step, drag, step. The sound echoed from the hallway outside the room. The thing wearing Jonas's face had reached the 4th floor. The landlord whispered urgently, "Find the original door." Jonas looked down the endless rows of doors. "Which one is that?" The landlord pointed deeper into the darkness. At the far end of the room stood a single door that looked older than the others. Its wood was cracked and blackened with age. The number on it was barely visible. 408. Jonas and the landlord began walking toward it. The deeper they went into the room, the quieter the world became. Even their footsteps seemed muffled now. Halfway down the corridor of doors, Jonas noticed something unsettling. Some of the doors were shaking slightly, as if something inside was trying to get out. Then he heard voices, faint whispers leaking from behind the doors. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Some cried for help. Some begged to be released. Others simply repeated the same words over and over. "Don't answer the knocking. Don't answer the knocking." Jonas quickened his pace. The door marked 408 grew larger ahead of them. Behind them, the hallway door creaked open. Drag, step, drag, step. The thing had entered the room. Jonas didn't dare turn around. The landlord grabbed his arm. "Hurry," he whispered. They reached the final door. Up close, it looked ancient. The wood was warped and covered in deep scratches. The handle was rusted and twisted like it had been melted. From the other side came a slow breathing sound. Jonas hesitated. "What's inside?" he asked. The landlord answered quietly, "Whatever started this." The dragging footsteps stopped somewhere behind them in the darkness. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then Jonas heard his own voice echo softly through the room. "Jonas." He turned slowly. Standing halfway down the corridor was the thing wearing his face. But it had changed. Its body looked taller now. Its limbs slightly too long. The smile stretched wider than before, splitting the corners of its cheeks. Behind it stood dozens of other figures, copies of people from the building, all watching silently. The creature raised its hand slowly and knocked on one of the doors. 3 slow knocks echoed through the endless hallway. The door opened. Something inside reached out. Jonas turned back to the final door marked 408. His hand trembled as he grabbed the handle. Behind him, the creature spoke again, using his voice. "If you open that door, you stay forever." Jonas tightened his grip. Then he pulled the door open, and the darkness inside looked back at him. The Last Bell. It was a cold November evening when Daniel realized he had forgotten his notebook at school. The building was already closed, but the janitor recognized him and let him in. "Be quick," the old man said. "The last bell rings soon." Daniel laughed. The last bell? School ended hours ago. The hallways were silent. Lockers stood like tall metal shadows. Every step Daniel took echoed through the building. His classroom was on the 3rd floor. When he reached it, the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the lights flickered. His notebook sat exactly where he left it, on the last desk near the window. As he grabbed it, the school bell rang. Brrrg! Daniel froze. The bell wasn't supposed to ring. Then he heard something else. Chairs scraping. He turned slowly. The desks around him were moving, inch by inch, sliding across the floor as if someone invisible was sitting down in them. Another sound followed, whispering. Soft voices filled the room. Class is starting. Daniel's heart pounded. He ran toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The lights went out. In the darkness, he heard footsteps walking toward him, slow, heavy. Then the light flickered back on for a second, and Daniel saw them, students, dozens of pale students sitting at the desks. Their eyes were completely black. At the front of the class stood a teacher Daniel had never seen before. Her neck was twisted slightly, like it had been broken. She slowly raised a piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Detention forever." Daniel screamed and rushed for the door. It burst open, and he ran down the hallway, the whispers chasing him. "Stay. Class isn't over." He didn't stop until he reached the entrance. Outside, the janitor was waiting. Daniel gasped, "There's something upstairs." The janitor looked at him sadly. "You heard the last bell, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. The old man whispered, "That means they marked you present." Then the school bell rang again behind them. And from the dark hallway, Daniel's name echoed in dozens of voices. "Daniel, take your seat." Daniel stood frozen outside the school gate as the voices whispered his name from the dark hallway behind him. "Daniel, take your seat." The janitor slowly closed the heavy front doors and locked them. The echo of the lock clicking sounded louder than the bell itself. "You should go home," the janitor said quietly. But Daniel couldn't move. His legs felt heavy, like something inside the school was pulling him back. "What was that?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking. The janitor looked at the building for a long moment before answering. "This school used to stay open late. Night classes, detention, extra lessons. But years ago something happened after the last bell." Daniel swallowed. "What happened?" The janitor didn't answer right away. The wind pushed dry leaves across the empty schoolyard. Finally, he spoke. "One winter night, a group of students were kept in detention by a teacher who refused to let them leave until their work was perfect. The bell rang, but the teacher ignored it. The students stayed. Hours passed. Snowstorm came. Power went out. No one realized they were still inside. Daniel's stomach twisted. What happened to them? The janitor's eyes looked tired. They were found the next morning. Every student sitting at their desk, exactly like a class in session. Daniel whispered, "Dead?" The janitor nodded slowly. Frozen. The heating had stopped when the power died. Daniel looked back at the school. One classroom window on the third floor flickered with light. "But I saw them." The janitor sighed. "Sometimes the bell rings again. When it does, the class returns." Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out weak. "Ghost stories." Then the bell rang again. Brrrr. The sound was louder this time. The lights inside the school turned on one by one, floor by floor. First floor, second floor, third floor. Daniel's heart dropped. Silhouettes appeared in the classroom windows. Students, sitting perfectly still, all facing the front of the class. One figure stood up slowly, the twisted-neck teacher. Even from the schoolyard, Daniel could see her arm lift. She pointed directly at him. The school doors slammed open. The hallway lights flickered violently. The whisper returned, louder now. "Daniel, class has started." Daniel stepped backward. "No." The janitor grabbed his arm. "Don't listen. Walk away." But the whisper grew stronger, like dozens of voices layered together. "Late students must report. Late students must report." Daniel suddenly felt dizzy. His feet began walking toward the doors. He tried to stop, but couldn't. "I can't control it," he cried. The janitor pulled harder. For a moment, Daniel stopped moving. Then the third bell rang, the loudest yet. The janitor's grip slipped. Daniel walked straight through the doors into the hallway. The doors slammed shut behind him. Darkness swallowed the entrance. Inside, the school felt different. The air was cold, colder than winter outside. Lockers rattled softly as he walked past them. His feet moved on their own toward the stairs. Step, step, step. Every floor he passed looked wrong. Classroom doors were open. Desks were full of silent students staring at empty chalkboards. None of them moved. None of them blinked. But every head slowly turned as Daniel passed. Third floor. The hallway light flickered. At the end of the corridor was his classroom. The door slowly opened by itself. Inside, the ghostly class sat exactly where he saw them before. The teacher stood at the front with chalk in her hand. The blackboard now had more words written across it. Attendance. The teacher turned her broken neck toward him. Crack, crack, crack. She smiled slowly. "You are late." Daniel tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The teacher pointed to the only empty chair in the room. "Take your seat." The chair slid backward across the floor, waiting for him. The other students watched silently with their black eyes. Daniel stepped forward, one step, then another, until he sat down. The chair slid forward on its own. The teacher wrote something else on the board. "Class will never end." Then she turned back toward the class. "Page 1. Every student slowly opened their notebooks. Daniel looked down. His notebook was already open. On the first page were the words, "Welcome to detention." Suddenly, the bell rang again, but this time, it didn't stop ringing. And outside in the empty schoolyard, the janitor stood alone staring at the dark building. He sighed quietly and whispered, "Another one marked present." Inside the classroom, Daniel finally understood the truth. The last bell wasn't the end of school. It was the beginning. And the class would continue forever. The bell kept ringing, not loud anymore, but constant, like a heartbeat echoing through the school walls. Daniel sat frozen in the desk, while the other students slowly turned the pages of their notebooks at the exact same time. Flip. The sound was perfectly synchronized. The teacher's twisted neck cracked again as she faced the blackboard. "Lesson 1, she said softly. Her voice sounded like chalk scraping glass. Daniel looked around. None of the students were breathing. None of them blinked. But their pencils began to move across the pages. Scratching, writing, scratching, writing. Daniel looked down at his own notebook. His hand slowly picked up the pencil without him moving it. The pencil began writing by itself. The words formed slowly. "How did you die?" Daniel's heart pounded. "I'm not dead," he whispered. The teacher stopped writing on the board. Every pencil in the classroom stopped at the exact same moment. Slowly, every head turned toward him. The teacher smiled wider. Everyone says that at first. The lights flickered again. For a moment, Daniel saw something terrifying. The classroom changed. The desks were old and broken. Ice covered the floor. The windows were frozen shut. Snow had blown inside. The students sitting around him were no longer pale. They were blue and stiff, like frozen statues. Then the lights flickered again, and the normal ghostly classroom returned. Daniel pushed his chair back. "I'm leaving." The teacher slammed the chalk onto the desk. The classroom door slammed shut again. The whispers started rising around him. No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention. The voices grew louder and louder until Daniel covered his ears. Suddenly, one student across from him lifted their hand slowly. Their arm cracked as it moved. "Teacher, he doesn't understand the rules." The teacher nodded. "Then we will show him." She turned toward Daniel and pointed at the blackboard again. The writing changed by itself. The chalk floated across the board, writing new words. "Recess." The bell rang again. Instantly, every student stood up at the same time. Chairs slammed against the floor. Daniel stumbled backward as the classroom door creaked open. The hallway outside was darker than before. The teacher spoke again. "Recess lasts 10 minutes." She looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "If you're not back before the bell, you join the hallway." Daniel didn't ask what that meant. The students began walking into the hallway slowly. Their footsteps echoed like hollow wood. Daniel followed carefully behind them. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Lockers lined both sides, but many were bent open, like something inside had tried to escape. One locker door suddenly slammed shut by itself. Daniel jumped. A student beside him whispered without moving their mouth. "They're still in there." Daniel stepped away quickly. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading down to the gym. The students walked toward it. Daniel hesitated, then followed. The gym doors opened slowly. Inside was darkness, except for a faint light above the basketball hoop. The floor was covered in dust. Old sports equipment lay scattered everywhere. The ghost students spread out across the gym silently. Some stood under the basketball hoop. Some sat on the bleachers. One student bounced a basketball slowly. Boom, boom, boom. Each bounce echoed too long. Daniel backed toward the exit. Then he noticed something. A door in the far corner of the gym, slightly open. A red exit sign glowed above it. His heart jumped. A way out. He slowly walked toward it. The other students didn't seem to notice. The basketball kept bouncing behind him. Boom, boom, boom. He reached the door and pushed it open quietly. It led to a narrow maintenance hallway. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A single light flickered. At the end of the hallway, stairs leading outside. Daniel started running. His footsteps echoed loudly now. Halfway down the hallway, the bell rang again. Daniel froze. Recess was over. Behind him, the gym doors slammed open violently. Dozens of footsteps began running into the hallway. Fast. Too fast. The whispers screamed now. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Daniel ran toward the stairs. The footsteps behind him got closer. He reached the stairs and burst through the door at the top, but the staircase didn't lead outside. It led back to the 3rd floor hallway, the same hallway as before. The classroom door stood open, waiting for him. The teacher stood inside, smiling. Every ghost student was already back at their desks, except one empty seat, Daniel's seat. The teacher slowly checked the clock on the wall. "You are 3 seconds late." Daniel backed away slowly. The hallway behind him grew darker. Shapes moved inside the shadows between the lockers. Hands began pushing through the locker vents from the inside. Pale fingers reaching out, scratching, grabbing. The teacher spoke one last time. "Late students." The locker doors burst open all at once. Dozens of shadowy figures crawled out from inside them. "Join the hallway," Daniel screamed as the shadows rushed toward him, and inside the classroom. The bell rang again. Daniel turned and ran. The shadows spilling from the lockers rushed behind him, their long fingers scraping the floor. The teacher didn't chase him. She simply stood in the doorway of the classroom, smiling calmly while the bell continued ringing somewhere deep inside the building. Daniel sprinted down the hallway, but something was wrong. The corridor stretched longer with every step. The ceiling lights flickered one by one, turning off behind him. Darkness swallowed the hallway piece by piece. The whispers followed. Late, late, late. Daniel reached the stairwell and slammed the door open. He rushed down the steps 2 at a time. 1st floor, then the 2nd floor, then the 1st floor again. He stopped suddenly, his chest heaving. The sign on the wall clearly said 3rd floor. "No, no," Daniel whispered. The building had trapped him. The bell rang again. This time it sounded slower, heavier, like something massive was pulling the rope. From the stairwell above him came footsteps, slow, patient. Step, crack, step, crack. The teacher was coming. Daniel burst through the stairwell door back into the hallway. The lockers on this floor were different. Older, rusted. Some had claw marks across the metal. A faint blue light flickered from one locker at the end of the corridor. Daniel slowly walked toward it. Inside, he could hear breathing. Weak, shaky breathing. He pulled the locker door open. A boy sat curled inside. Unlike the others, his eyes weren't black. They were normal, terrified. "You're alive?" Daniel whispered. The boy nodded quickly. "Not for long if she finds you." "The teacher?" The boy nodded again. "She keeps us here until we stop trying to leave." Daniel helped him out of the locker. "How long have you been here?" The boy looked down the hallway nervously. "Time doesn't work here. Maybe hours, maybe years." The footsteps in the stairwell grew louder. Step, crack, step, crack. The boy grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "We have to get to the boiler room." "Why?" "It's the only place she doesn't go." They began running down the hallway together. The lights flickered violently now. Some lockers burst open as they passed, skeletal hands reaching out before snapping back inside. The whispers were screaming now. "Class is starting. Class is starting." They reached the end of the hallway and pushed through a heavy metal door. The staircase behind it led deep underground. The air became warmer as they descended. The bell sound faded slightly. At the bottom was a dark room filled with old pipes and a massive rusted boiler. Steam hissed quietly from the valves. The boy collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. "She hates this place," he said. "Too much heat." Daniel leaned against the boiler. "Then we're safe." For a moment, everything was silent. Then something tapped the metal pipe above them. Tap. Daniel looked up. Another tap echoed from deeper in the pipes. Tap, tap, tap. The boy's face turned pale. "That's not the teacher." The tapping grew louder. Something was moving through the pipes, crawling through them. The metal began shaking. Steam burst from one of the valves with a loud scream. Then the bell rang again. But now it sounded like it was coming from inside the boiler room. The heavy door behind them slowly creaked open. The teacher stepped inside. Her twisted neck bent further than before, her head hanging slightly to the side. She smiled wider than any human should. "Recess is over." Daniel grabbed a metal pipe from the floor. "Stay back." The teacher didn't stop walking. The pipes above them suddenly burst open. Dark shapes poured out. Thin, ghostly students crawling across the ceiling like spiders. The boy screamed. The teacher raised her hand calmly. "Return to class." Instantly, the crawling figures dropped to the floor and surrounded Daniel and the boy. The teacher looked pleased. "Detention continues." The bell stopped ringing. The classroom door upstairs slammed shut on its own, and in the boiler room, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the boiler room. For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't see anything at all. The only sounds were the hissing pipes and the slow dripping of water from the ceiling. Then something moved. A faint blue glow appeared across the room. One by one, the ghostly students' eyes began to glow in the darkness, like dozens of tiny lanterns. They surrounded Daniel and the other boy in a circle. The teacher stepped forward slowly, her broken neck tilting further to the side. "You tried to skip class," she said calmly. Her voice echoed through the pipes. "Skipping class has consequences." Daniel gripped the metal pipe tighter. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted. The teacher's smile faded slightly. For the first time, her face looked angry. "Because class must continue." The pipes above them rattled violently again. Steam burst from a crack and filled the room with a thick white fog. Through the fog, Daniel saw the ghost students moving closer. Their footsteps dragged across the concrete floor like chains. The boy beside him whispered quickly, "Don't let them touch you." "Why?" "Because once they do..." Before he finished, a ghost student lunged forward. Daniel swung the metal pipe as hard as he could. The pipe passed straight through the ghost's body like mist. The student didn't stop. A freezing hand grabbed Daniel's arm. The cold was unbearable. It felt like ice burning under his skin. Daniel screamed and pulled away. The ghost's fingers left frost marks on his sleeve. The teacher clapped her hands once. Instant silence filled the room. "Enough games," she said. "Return them to their seats." The students began walking forward together. Their glowing eyes surrounded Daniel and the other boy completely. The boy panicked and ran toward the door. Two ghosts grabbed him instantly. He screamed, "Help me!" Daniel tried to reach him, but the ghosts dragged the boy across the floor. His hands clawed at the concrete as they pulled him toward the door. "Please," the boy cried. The teacher looked down at him calmly. "Late students belong in the hallway." The ghosts dragged the boy out of the boiler room.